Have you ever felt the crushing weight of success? Have you ever tasted everything the world told you to desire, only to find your soul starving in the midst of it? What if the very life you are chasing today is the same one that will one day make you question your existence? Leo Tolstoy stood at the summit, applauded by kings, revered by the masses, envied by the world. Yet, in the echo of all that admiration, he heard a terrifying silence, a void that no applause could fill. In the dead of night, when all the noise died down, he saw the unbearable truth. He had conquered the world, but lost himself. This video is not about comfort. It's about confrontation. It's about the brutal courage it takes to walk away from everything, power, praise, and illusions, and to step into the lonely, sacred wilderness of truth. If you still have the courage to face this journey, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell. It helps us reach more seekers who, like you, are ready to abandon the lies and walk into the fire. Topic 1. The Empty Feast of Fame. In the prime of his life, Tolstoy had everything that any man could dream of. His novels were devoured across continents. His name opened doors in every palace and every salon. His voice carried the weight of influence, and yet, every accolade became a hollow echo inside him. The more the world praised him, the more he felt like a ghost wearing a golden mask. As the celebrations raged around him, Tolstoy realized that he was attending a feast where the dishes were made of dust. Every toast in his honor was a dagger twisted deeper into the realization that fame is not nourishment, it is poison disguised as wine. No matter how much he consumed, he grew thinner in spirit, weaker in will. There is a special kind of madness in realizing that what the world calls success is often nothing more than a beautifully decorated coffin. Tolstoy's laughter at the banquets turned into weeping in his chambers. He saw his face in the mirror, older, emptier, more afraid. What had he really gained? What had he truly built? Fame had stolen something more precious than his time. It had hijacked his soul, whispering sweet lies that kept him moving faster, achieving more, believing he was alive when in fact he was only performing. He was applauded not for who he was, but for who he pretended to be. The philosophers before him had warned of this. Socrates, Marcus Aurelius, even the prophets had spoken of the danger of selling one's soul for a handful of illusions. Yet Tolstoy, like so many of us, had to learn it through pain. Only pain teaches us what comfort hides. He began to see himself not as a creator, but as a product, a brand manufactured for mass consumption. His words no longer felt like living fire. They felt like empty shells, thrown into the crowd to be devoured and forgotten. His spirit screamed for something real, something that fame could never offer. Have you ever pursued something for years, only to wake up one day and realize it was never what you truly wanted? That it was a dream placed into your hands by someone else's expectations? That feeling, that devastating awakening, was the beginning of Tolstoy's revolt. He understood that no amount of admiration could heal the wound inside him. In fact, the more he was admired, the more he bled invisibly. Every smile from the crowd became a chain around his neck, every standing ovation a tightening of the noose. He was not living, he was being consumed. Tolstoy's hunger for truth grew unbearable. It gnawed at him in the quiet hours, it burned in the spaces between his words. He realized that true creation, true life, could not coexist with the need to be approved, celebrated, or adored. One would have to die for the other to live. And so, like a dying man who throws off his finest clothes because he can no longer breathe, Tolstoy began preparing for the unimaginable. He would have to walk away. From the fame, from the security, from the identity he had spent decades building. He would have to die to be reborn. Comment below. Have you ever had to walk away from something everyone said was good, just to save your own soul? Topic 2. The Awakening of the Spirit. The breaking point came not with a dramatic crash, but with a silent question that crept into Tolstoy's mind late one sleepless night. Why live at all? A question so simple, so deadly, that it pierced through every layer of illusion he had wrapped around himself. The luxury, the awards, the respect, none of it could answer. For the first time, he admitted to himself that he was dying. not in the body, but in the spirit. He had lost his axis, his reason, his anchor. He was a man adrift in a sea of endless achievements, none of which could tell him why he was still breathing, or why he should even bother to continue. The world calls this a crisis. But in reality, it was a resurrection. A brutal, painful resurrection. For only when the false self dies, can the true self even begin to stir. Tolstoy had to lose everything that was not real in order to find the faint, trembling heartbeat of what was. He turned inward, desperate, frantic, searching for something that could not be bought, cannot be earned, and is barely even spoken of in the world of the living, a reason to live that was worth dying for. A truth that would survive even when the applause had long since faded into dust. The answers did not come from books. They did not come from priests or kings or scholars. They came in moments of silence, in the agony of not knowing, in the surrender of being nothing. Tolstoy had to endure the fire of meaninglessness before the gold of true meaning could emerge. He stopped writing. He stopped pretending. He walked away from the gatherings, the accolades, the endless chatter. His absence was noticed, whispered about, ridiculed. But he did not care. When you are reborn, the opinions of the dead no longer matter to you. He wandered the fields, spoke to peasants, listened to the wind. He realized that truth does not live in the marble halls of power. It lives in the dust of the earth, in the cracked hands of the forgotten, in the silent weeping of those who have nothing left to lose. Tolstoy began to see that life was not about ascending higher, but about descending deeper. Not about gathering more, but about shedding everything that weighs down the soul. True life is hidden beneath the layers we spend our whole lives constructing. Every night, he would sit by the fire and contemplate the mystery of being alive. Not to impress anyone, not to produce another masterpiece, but simply to exist, to feel the trembling, sacred miracle of breath and blood and wonder. He had found the doorway he had spent his whole life ignoring. And in that doorway, he understood, truth is not a destination. It is not an achievement. It is a way of being. A surrender. A stripping away. A holy emptiness that reveals what the crowded, noisy world can never show. This was the path he chose. This was the death that gave him life. Comment below, what illusions are you ready to burn in order to find something real? Topic 3. The rebellion against the false world. Tolstoy's decision to walk away was not a quiet withdrawal. It was an act of spiritual rebellion. To turn your back on fame is to declare war on the values that the world worships. It is to stand naked before a society that measures worth in applause, wealth, and conformity, and to say, "I am not yours." He refused the labels they had placed upon him: genius, master, idol. These words, once intoxicating, now tasted like ash in his mouth. He realized that to accept their praise was to accept their terms of reality, a reality built on illusions, power games, and desperate performances. Tolstoy began dismantling the fortress he had built around himself, stone by stone. He stripped away the accolades, the adulation, the identity he had crafted so meticulously. And in doing so, he discovered something both terrifying and liberating. Beneath all the layers, he was utterly empty. But this emptiness was not a curse. It was a sacred clearing. A space where the seeds of a different life could be planted. A life not built on the shifting sands of public opinion, but rooted in something raw, ancient, and real, a truth that asked for everything and promised nothing in return. He rejected the elaborate rituals of society. He saw through the masquerade of status and success. He began dressing like a peasant, working the fields, seeking conversations not with the rich and powerful, but with the forgotten souls who had been trampled by the same system he had once served. The elites, the intellectuals, even his own admirers were horrified. How could the great Leo Tolstoy, the crowned writer of the Russian Empire, choose to live like a common laborer? They called him mad, deluded, ungrateful. But Tolstoy had tasted the emptiness of their approval and found it bitter beyond words. True rebellion, he realized, is not loud. It is silent. It is not about waving flags or shouting slogans. It is about quietly refusing to play by the rules of a game designed to enslave you. It is about becoming invisible to the false world so that you can finally become visible to your own soul. He lived among those who had nothing, and there he found everything he had been missing. Simplicity, honesty, suffering without masks, joy without price tags. He saw that truth lives not in grand speeches, but in broken hands offering bread. Not in polished essays, but in tears shed without witnesses. This was not a performance. This was not an experiment. It was a death and a rebirth. Tolstoy knew that every step he took away from the glittering palaces of fame was a step deeper into the wilderness of truth. And he was willing to be forgotten by the world if it meant being remembered by eternity. Comment below, what is one false value you feel ready to abandon, no matter the cost? Topic 4. The agony of shedding illusions. The process of awakening is not graceful. It is not a beautiful montage of serene moments and enlightened smiles. It is brutal. It is bloody. It feels like being flayed alive while the world laughs and calls you foolish for stepping out of the line they have drawn for you. Tolstoy's descent into truth was marked by unbearable agony. Every illusion he tore away was like ripping out a piece of his own flesh. He was not shedding something external. He was destroying parts of himself that he had once loved, nurtured, and believed in. He mourned the death of his old dreams, the dream of being immortalized through literature, the dream of being remembered and revered, the dream of making a difference in a world that worships noise and forgets wisdom. Every dream he buried felt like a small funeral inside his soul. The loneliness was staggering. Friends abandoned him. Critics mocked him. His own family struggled to understand. He became a stranger not only to the world but sometimes even to himself. When you choose truth over comfort, do not expect applause. Expect silence. Expect desertion. Expect darkness. And yet, in the suffocating blackness, something miraculous began to stir. In losing the world, Tolstoy began to gain something infinitely more precious: himself. Not the self they had named, praised, or bought, but the self he had glimpsed only in dreams, in pain, in fleeting moments of unbearable clarity. He wrote not for fame but for survival. His words became desperate prayers, silent screams, love letters to a reality he could not fully grasp but could no longer deny. Each sentence was a step through the fire, a refusal to return to the comforting lies that had once seduced him. Pain became his teacher. Failure became his friend. Confusion became his altar. Tolstoy surrendered not to despair, but to the fierce, cleansing power of truth. He learned that to truly live is to bleed for something real, to sacrifice everything you are not in order to find who you are. The world accused him of madness. But the world has always called mad those who refuse to live by its delusions. Socrates drank the hemlock. Jesus bore the cross. The prophets wandered the deserts. Tolstoy walked into the wilderness of obscurity, and there, in the ashes, he found his soul. Comment below, have you ever felt your old self dying, and a truer version of you struggling to be born? Topic 5. The sacred simplicity of truth. As the years passed, Tolstoy's life grew simpler and more sacred. He abandoned the trappings of wealth. He rejected titles, honors, and formalities. He sought a life stripped to its essence: manual labor, simple food, honest speech, silent prayer. He became a pilgrim in a world addicted to spectacle. In the fields, he found revelations that no library could offer. In the sweat of his brow, he touched truths that no university could teach. He learned that to be human is not to dominate, impress, or accumulate, but to serve, to suffer, and to wonder at the miracle of existence itself. He realized that truth is not a doctrine, but a posture. Not a set of beliefs, but a way of being. To live truthfully is to let go of everything that is not essential, to burn away the lies until all that remains is breath, presence, and a love that asks for nothing in return. Tolstoy found divinity not in churches, but in the open fields. Not in dogmas, but in the open wound of the heart. He saw that the sacred is not a distant kingdom, but a hidden fire burning in the midst of ordinary life, invisible to the eyes of those too busy chasing shadows. He spoke less. He listened more. He judged less. He forgave more. He realized that the greatest wisdom is not knowing everything, but surrendering to the mystery of not knowing, and loving anyway. The mystery of existence, the trembling miracle of each breath, became his gospel. His writing changed forever. No longer crafted for applause, his words became offerings, naked, bleeding, true. They no longer aimed to entertain or impress. They aimed to awaken, to shatter illusions, to call forth the sacred hunger that slumbers in every human soul. Tolstoy knew he could never fully embody the truth he had glimpsed. He was painfully aware of his own contradictions, his failures, his pride. But he also knew that the journey itself, the relentless striving, the refusal to surrender to falsehood, was a sacred act of rebellion against the death of the soul. He no longer sought to be understood. He no longer feared being forgotten. He lived, he loved, he suffered, and in doing so, he touched something eternal. In the simplicity of his brokenness, he found a wholeness that the glittering world could never offer. Comment below, what does truth mean to you, not as an idea, but as a way of living? Topic 6. The battle against the old self. Even after abandoning fame, after shedding the golden chains that once imprisoned him, Tolstoy realized the most brutal battle was not against the world. It was against himself. The old self, the self that craved approval, admiration, certainty, still whispered in his darkest hours. There were nights when he longed to return. To feel the comfort of applause, the seductive power of being someone in the eyes of others. The temptation to slip back into the carefully crafted persona was almost unbearable. Because the truth is, killing the false self is not a single event. It is a war without end. Every day, Tolstoy had to choose, to live for truth or to live for appearances. Every morning, the old self would rise from the ashes, whispering clever lies. Just one more book for glory. Just one more step back into the spotlight. Just a little compromise, and you'll feel alive again. But he knew better. He had tasted the emptiness behind the mask. He had seen the rotting bones beneath the gilded throne. No matter how sweet the illusions appeared, they could never fill the cavern that had opened inside him, the sacred space where only truth could live. Tolstoy fought with prayer, with labor, with silence. He stripped his days of unnecessary noise, seeking the raw, unfiltered experience of simply existing without performance. Some days he failed. Some days he found himself entangled again in pride, vanity, fear. And yet he fought on. The battle against the old self is the ultimate rebellion. It is not enough to walk away from the world. You must also walk away from the parts of yourself that the world created. The parts that crave validation, that fear rejection, that cling to comfort even when it poisons you. Tolstoy learned that spiritual freedom is not a destination but a discipline. A daily crucifixion of the false, a daily resurrection of the real. And this journey is not linear. It is full of betrayals, setbacks, humiliations. True liberation is bought with blood, not dreams. He wrote of this battle not as a victor, but as a fellow soldier. He exposed his own hypocrisies, his failures, his contradictions. He knew that the moment you think you have conquered the false self, it has already conquered you again in a subtler, deadlier form. The price of living in truth is that you must die 1,000 deaths. You must watch your dreams, your identities, your ambitions burn in fires you did not ask for. And you must walk through the ashes without guarantees, without applause, often without even hope. Tolstoy accepted this brutal path. Not because he was strong, but because he had no choice left. He had seen the alternative, and he could never return. Better to stumble bleeding on the road to truth than to dance gracefully in the palaces of lies. Comment below. What part of your old self do you still feel clinging to you? And are you willing to let it burn? Topic 7. Walking alone into the eternal. In the final chapters of his life, Tolstoy embraced the sacred loneliness that truth demands. He understood that the deeper you go into yourself, the fewer companions you will find. Most people are not afraid of failure. They are afraid of facing the silence where the masks fall away. Tolstoy lived not as a hermit, but as a pilgrim whose home was not a place but a path. He wandered not to escape life, but to enter it more fully, to breathe it raw, without filters, without ornaments. his fame faded. His riches scattered. His name, once shouted in salons, became a whisper in fields. But he was more alive in that whisper than he had ever been in the thunderous applause. He had become a man emptied of everything except the sacred pulse of being itself. And in that emptiness, he found a fullness that the world could never steal from him again. He learned to love without conditions, to suffer without self-pity, to forgive without forgetting. He became a living question mark in a world addicted to answers, a silent rebellion in a world drunk on noise. His life became a sermon that no words could fully capture. At the end, Tolstoy knew that truth is not something you possess, it is something you surrender to. You do not conquer it. You do not master it. You kneel before it, stripped of all titles, all defenses, all illusions. And in that surrender, you are not diminished, you are finally made whole. Walking away was not an act of despair. It was an act of sacred defiance. It was a declaration that there are things more precious than comfort, more real than fame, more eternal than applause. It was a testimony written not in ink, but in scars. His journey was not perfect. His failures did not end. His contradictions did not vanish. But he had crossed a threshold from which there was no return. He had tasted the living waters that flow only in the deserts of the soul, and he knew that even in his weakness, even in his confusion, he was free. In the end, Tolstoy did not find an answer. He found a way of walking, a way of breathing, a way of living that did not depend on the crumbling structures of a dying world. And perhaps that is the greatest truth of all. The truth is not somewhere you arrive. It is the path you dare to walk, alone, into the unknown. Comment below, are you ready to walk away from the life they promise you, and find the one your soul is still waiting for? Walk away to be reborn, your true life awaits. Leo Tolstoy did not walk away because he was tired. He walked away because he was waking up. He saw the beautiful corpse that fame had offered him and chose the agony of rebirth over the comfort of decay. In shedding everything the world called success, he found something the world could never name: truth, burning and wild, hidden in the silence beneath all illusions. His journey was not a rejection of life, but an embrace of it, raw, naked, and sacred beyond words. You and I stand at the same threshold. Every day, the world demands that we stay asleep, that we chase applause, cling to false dreams, perform the rituals of emptiness. But in your deepest soul, you know there is another way. A way of walking, bleeding, breathing that is not about being seen, but about truly seeing. Tolstoy's story is not ancient history. It is a mirror, reflecting the unbearable choice we must all face: comfort or truth, applause or freedom, survival or resurrection. If this journey stirred something inside you, if you felt even a flicker of the sacred fire that once consumed Tolstoy's soul, then this is your sign. Do not silence it. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and activate the notification bell, because there are still truths to uncover, still deserts to cross, still a sacred life waiting for you beyond the ruins of the one they taught you to love. And share this video with someone whose soul is ready to remember what they came here to do. The path is hard. The road is lonely. But the life waiting for you at the end is real.